And joining us now to debate the greening of the fleet in Buffalo, New York via web camera, Lauren Fix, who calls herself the car coach. She's an automotive consultant. And here in studio, Dennis DesRosiers of DesRosiers Automotive Consultants, Bob Oliver, Executive Director of Pollution Probe, Tyler Hamilton, energy reporter with the Toronto Star, and David Booth, automotive consultant with the National Post. And we have assembled all of you here today on both sides of the border. Lauren, good to meet you via webcam tonight. Because we're really trying to find out how much of this greening of the fleet is legitimate and real, and how much of it is just marketing because the car companies know we all want to do our bit to make the world a little greener. And to that end, I'm actually going to start with a piece Peter Gorey wrote in your newspaper, the Toronto Star, from last month. It goes like this. All this likely overstates the performance at any distance because the promise of 40 miles on battery alone is open to question. The EPA, Environmental Protection Association, omits many real-world conditions such as extra passengers, air conditioning, wind, and hills that reduce the all-battery range. This isn't to say the Volt will flop, but GM is courting trouble by trumpeting dubious performance claims. Chances are, by the time the car comes to market, nobody will take 230 seriously. But the attempt to feed it to us could leave a lingering bad taste that makes the entire project unpalatable. Dennis, to you first. 230 miles per gallon is what GM is saying their battery-powered car, the Volt, will get. Is that true?
It may be true, may not be true, but in my mind, it's irrelevant. The fact of the matter is there's not very many consumers who are going to buy that vehicle for a long, long time. You're looking up a ramp-up of that type of vehicle, be it the Volt or other competitors. That's going to take a decade, probably more.
But as we look in truth in advertising here, Tyler, is it feasible that this car could actually get 230 miles to the gallon?
Certainly. I've been in a plug-in Prius that has gone, and I've driven it for 2 weeks, and it's gone 150 miles per gallon. It just depends on your driving conditions. I think when GM makes those claims, they have to have a big asterisk there saying, you know, if you drive so many miles per day, you can get this range. But if you go beyond it, see, this is all about range. What GM is missing here is the discussion of how far these cars will go before you end up getting on gas. And as Peter mentioned in that column, the farther you go, the more gas you use and less battery you use, therefore the mileage goes down.
Well, Lauren, I'm wondering, I can imagine people sitting at home right now saying, I'm guessing that if I were in San Francisco at the top of one of those hills, had it in neutral, and were going down a hill without using any, pressure on the gas pedal at all, maybe I could get 230 miles a gallon under those circumstances. Otherwise, I kind of doubt it. Would they be right?
Well, I don't know if you get that much fuel miles per gallon, but you got to also remember how this 230 miles per gallon was calculated. It isn't calculated the same way as you would calculate gas-powered vehicles. It was calculated based on kilowatts and how many miles it would travel. It was a calculation because Nissan's saying, well, we can do 300 miles to the gallon. So when you really look at that, anytime you're coasting, you're not using gasoline. And there are lots of things you can do to improve your fuel economy. 230, as your other guests were saying, I think is not something that's going to happen in the next few years. I think you're not going to see that technology till down the road.
David?
Well, let's understand as well that if you don't drive it more than 40 miles or 64 kilometers, you will get, infinite miles per gallon. You will not 230, not a 500, not 1,000. You won't use any gasoline whatsoever. It's an electric car until it goes 40 miles. One of GM's worries is that if somebody is completely a city commuter, the engine will sit idle for so long using no gasoline that it'll actually become gummed up and all the problems that happen when a car stands still. What's right about Mr. Gorey's column is that it depends on how far you drive. What he missed was the point that you can, it is essentially an electric car, say, during the week, Monday to Friday when you go to work, and then it offers the same convenience of a regular gasoline-powered car to go for a long trip to Ottawa or to Montreal on the weekend, which is unique right now compared to any other electric car on the market. The rest of the electric cars offer no miles per gallon like the Volt does in the city, but you can't go anywhere.
Bob, it would be great if it were true. Does it ring true to you?
The metric is misleading. What they've done is they've looked at a gallon as being an energy equivalent to a kilowatt hour. So how many kilowatt hours are in a gallon of gasoline, and that's how they develop their mile per gallon metric. When the vehicle is running on full charge of electricity, it's actually running quite efficiently because you're dealing with an electric motor, which as an energy conversion device is
more than twice as efficient as a internal combustion engine. Internal combustion engine at best is 35–40% efficient. It can extract that much energy and put it to useful work, and the rest is wasted. With an electric motor, you're able to use a lot more of the energy in the battery, and so what they end up with is this inflated metric. But what it doesn't do is illustrate to the consumer any clarity on what they're paying their money for. And if consumers don't have the information they need to recognize the value of an investment in environmental technology or fuel-efficient technology, they're going to discount the future benefits of it. And like Dennis said, I think they're going to pass on this.
Dennis, tell me, does it? Everybody wants to be greener when it comes to driving. I'm sure.
We hope.
You hope. I mean, yeah, it's common.
a problem there, though. A lot don't.
But does it? Okay, some don't, but you got to figure most people want to do their bit. I guess what they want to know is, does it take more energy to produce these so-called energy-efficient cars than the old ones?
Oh, I think that's an old debate that where the cost of doing the Prius and all of this stuff that's the internet. You see that all the time. I think there's a lot of garbage to that. I don't think anything that's been proven. Maybe technically you can build those cases. The fact of the matter is consumers going to look at the product. Does it meet its needs? Does it meet the performance needs, the cost needs, his fundamental needs in terms of size and getting him from point A to point B? And a lot of these vehicles may not meet the total needs of the consumer.
Well, Lauren, one of the things that I guess people are pointing to is that if you're plugging in your car to recharge it every night, and the electricity provided to that car is created by burning coal at some coal-fired generating station somewhere, are you really any further ahead? What's your view on that?
Well, you're going to be taking that off of Niagara Falls, which also, got the water power off of that, and you've also got nuclear power plants depending upon where you're located. So when you're looking at all these different power sources and you're drawing on this energy, on this power grid, at night it may be a cheaper way to go. But what they're talking about doing here in the U.S., which I think is really going to be a problem if this energy policy goes through, is they're going to force corporations to put up posts for people to plug in their cars during the day, which is going to put a bigger draw on the power grid. And if you remember a few years ago, we had a blackout in New York City because the power that's coming from Niagara Falls, both the U.S. and the Canadian side, we're supplying power to New York. Now, if we can't power New York City on its own, we start putting a draw with all these automobiles, we're going to have a real problem for people that have to plug in during the day. And these are things that aren't being thought out. Unfortunately, it's great to have great technology, but when you don't look at the bigger picture and the future picture, will the power grid be able to support it for those people that do have to plug in during the day? That's when you're going to have some other problems. And that's why many of the alternatives that we've come up with have had issues.
Tyler, then Bob.
Well, I think the mistake is that we're assuming that there's going to be millions of cars flooding the market within a year or two, and suddenly the grid's going to come down and everything's going to collapse. That's not the way it's going to happen. This is going to be an evolution. We're going to ramp up these cars, and we're modernizing our grid at the same time. And these cars will make more sense in some jurisdictions that have low emission electricity. In jurisdictions like Ontario, it makes perfect sense because last quarter, I think 95 or 90% of the electricity in the province was emission-free because we were using less coal. And that will be the same in various jurisdictions throughout the United States. And increasingly, what I find interesting about moving towards electric-powered vehicles is that you reduce the emissions coming out of the tailpipes, you shift them to the power plants. But there's far fewer power plants than there are cars. I think it's easier to take the power plants that are out there and clean those up and gradually modernize that fleet of power plants than to take hundreds of millions of cars on the road and then ask people to bring them back and clean them up.
Bob.
I think it's a question of return on investment. If you have, we have policies at work in Ontario to phase out our coal-fired power plant. There is a declining rate of demand for energy in Ontario, and we don't want to introduce a new element into the grid demand profile that's going to take us back in the other direction.
Just to be clear, you said a declining rate of demand. Demand is going up, but not as quickly as in the past. Is that what you mean?
That's right. We're long past an inflection point, and in fact, I think we're, in terms of raw demand, we're actually consuming less energy now than perhaps we were in the recent past. And you could attribute that to the economic downturn. But the point is that we might have asymmetric policy objectives here, and the trick is going to be in the infrastructure. What the placement of the infrastructure that facilitates a certain type of electric vehicle use might be very conducive to our climate change and our air pollution objectives. On the other hand, without any planning that goes into it, you may end up in a place that you don't expect.
David.
Well, we've been talking about electric cars more as a generic. In fact, you brought up the Chevrolet Volt as an electric car. In fact, it's an electric extended range car, which is different because it has a gasoline motor to take it further along once the battery runs out. Pure electric car, and you mentioned the miles per gallon, something of a boondoggle, but that's nothing compared to the misinformation and the phenomenal media coverage of the pure electric car, a la Nissan Leaf and stuff like that, and Better Place being the infrastructure giant that wants to put in recharging stations and battery swapping stations, and that is far less believable than anything General Motors has put out about the Volt. It's
all of the infrastructure you're saying is less believable than what the car
I mean, Better
companies wanna
Place
do?
is the biggest boondoggle in the whole business. I mean, it really is. That's the battery swapping. People are going to swap batteries along the highway.
Well, it's an idea.
No, it's a very bad idea.
Well, let me ask Dennis about the batteries themselves. How green are these batteries?
I don't know.
They're not that green.
They're not
I mean,
that green
I
from
guess
what I
it-
understand,
And
but
you're
I.
going to create hazardous waste besides, because you have to think about it. These are nickel-based batteries, and there's all kinds of hazardous waste in them. Someone's going to have to think about a way of recycling these batteries, because they certainly don't want to end up in landfills, because they'll cause pollution, not just water, but land.
Dennis.
You also have all of this media hype around electric, and it's fueled by the vehicle companies who are on this bandwagon. Governments jump on the bandwagon, McGinty, et cetera, et cetera. We're forgetting that there's a variety of other technologies out there that could help with environmental debate a lot. Diesel engines, ethanol, methanol, perhaps, natural gas, propane. Even there's experimentation with solar cars, hydrogen longer term. And getting singularly focused on a technology that may actually disappoint can be as equal a mistake by our government forces. We should be letting the market forces determine how to solve this issue. And the market does work. It has worked in the past. It'll work in the future. This issue may be slower than what we like,
So do
but
you
it
think,
does work.
Do you think when the Ontario government offers people $10,000 to buy a Volt, that's perverting the market?
That's a big mistake.
It is a mistake.
Absolutely.
Because?
Because it forces a technology that may or may not be there. We could wake up in 10 years and all the issues around electric be so overwhelming that we abandon it, and that we're instead into all diesel or all hybrid of some sort, et cetera, et cetera.
Tyler.
Well, I was going to address the recycling issue,
Sure.
but if I could first address that point. I think we have to make a decision on the vision of where we're heading long term, right? Are we hoping one day to get off fossil fuels? Is that something that's got to happen at some point? If that's the case, then are we going to be able to do that just on biofuels? I don't think so. So then the only obvious thing, the two things, I guess, would be hydrogen and electricity. They're both electric cars, and the cars that you develop for running on batteries can be easily made to run on fuel cells, and it's a good transition towards the hydrogen future. So I think what this government is doing, and you know, I don't like to compliment any government, but I think that McGinty is showing some kind of vision. Sure, maybe there's some problems there. He hasn't allocated money in the budget for this. Maybe it looks like with this relationship with Better Place that this is just a marketing ploy
Well,
by
the
the
car's not
province.
ready to buy yet anyway.
Yeah,
is it?
they're not ready to buy. But when they are ready to buy, this isn't just about the province giving the Volt a boost. This is about 12 companies or more out there that will have cars between 2010 and 2012 available to the public.
David?
Well, the cars are going to be ready next year, so you know they're going to start having these problems. The second thing is, as I agree partially with what Tyler said, that you know hydrogen is a good alternative, but one misnomer is that you absolutely need it to run it in a fuel cell electric car. I've driven 2 cars now that run hydrogen fuel right through a regular piston and Wankel engine. We could be working on that even quicker than electric cars.
What comes out the tailpipe?
Water. I actually drank the exhaust
The emissions
fumes.
free.
I drank the exhaust fumes of a BMW 7 Series. Yes, I did that.
And you're still alive to brag about it.
Not a
Not
problem.
many people can claim that.
Well, can I get into some discussion here? And Lauren, I'll start with you on this about picking a winner. There seems to be, and you know, whether the market does it or whether governments make a decision about it, there seems to be some desire that we figure out if, as Tyler says, we want to get off internal combustion engines and move to something else, what should it be? And who should decide what it is? Lauren, you want to come in on that?
I think the consumer should decide what it is, because it depends where you live and what your needs are. And that's what we've been saying all along. When you look at Europe, they've decided diesel, clean burning diesel, low sulfur diesel is the answer. And here in the US, we're just getting diesels available as of last October that are good in all 50 states that meet our emission standards and should meet all the Canadian emission standards as well. And personally, I think it's a great choice because you can tow a trailer, you can haul something. When you have any electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, there is no towing capacity. And so that's going to make an issue of anyone who has any recreational vehicles of any way, shape, or form. But when you're looking at the big cities, you're looking at Toronto, New York, Chicago, LA, it makes sense to have an all-electric car depending upon your driving needs, or even a gas/electric car. But if you're in the middle of the country, neither, it's not going to make a lot of sense. Hydrogen might be your answer, or compressed natural gas, which is still another thing that we haven't really addressed. I think one of the big mistakes we did here in the US is we used ethanol. We said that's going to be the answer. They went and built all these plants. The government invested all this money. And now we have plants that are absolutely stagnant with no employees, and no one's using ethanol. So we decided to do the same thing with hydrogen down here. We built great hydrogen vehicles. I have also drank the exhaust out of a Ford Edge and out of a Chevrolet Equinox, and they work great, and the technology is there. Our government then pulled all the technology, all the monies that were going to that, and now they're switching to battery technology. They need to give these technologies a chance to showcase their capabilities, and compressed natural gas as well as hydrogen are great solutions. But you have to get this. This takes time for this to develop. It doesn't happen overnight, no matter how much money.
Let me get Bob Oliver on this. We've here battery, we've got ethanol, we've got fuel cell, hydrogen, we've got clean diesel, which is another new expression, I suspect, to many people. Which one do you like, and who should decide which way we go?
A market has to have a big say in what we do. It's a tough call what the right thing is. What we need are more energy efficient cars, whatever fuel they're riding in, driving on. They need to be using less of it. That's what's going to cut down the emissions, and there are a range of technologies. I mean, this is more about automotive components than it is about the overall car. In the US, you've got fuel efficiency standards coming forward, and Canada's supposed to follow suit with its own standards. These standards are not designed to get people out of a big Cadillac and into a small Chevette. They're designed very specifically and as fairly as possible to draw technologies into both those models that make them proportionately more fuel efficient.
Now, is that happening because governments have put regulations in place saying clean up your act? Or is
Exactly.
It
is entirely the regulations, and the regulations are very highly and finely tuned to correct for what I was saying earlier, which was the undervaluation, the discount that consumers place on future fuel
Let me get
savings.
Dennis on this. Are governments going to have to regulate what eventually comes out at the end of the day as the winning technology?
It's going to have to. They are. As simple as that.
But you don't like that idea,
they're
do you?
already there. Well, there's a role for government regulation, but we often forget about the person buying the vehicle. You know, let's face it, Toyota advertises the most fuel-efficient fleet in America or in the marketplace. Only about 45–50% of the Toyota owners buy a small fuel-efficient Toyota. You know, the consumer has the right to go in. You can have the diesel, the electric, every single one of these technologies in a car lot. The guy still may go and buy the Hummer.
But
so who is in charge of the consumer?
Okay,
is it
David,
the vehicle company? Is it
Well, that's a good
government?
question. Are we at a time, I mean, I suspect if you talk to Elizabeth May, the leader of the Green Party, she would tell you that we are at such a time in the life of this planet right now that we can't give consumers the choice to buy cars that pollute. And therefore, government should put in place, constrictions on what kind of cars can be made.
I guess we're going to have to shut down McDonald's too because there's too many obese people in the world. I'm sorry, I can't see that. I mean, people don't necessarily want these cars quite yet. I mean, it's going to be a tough row. Hybrids have been around for about 9 years. They own little less than 3% of the market share. They offer no inconveniences compared to a regular car other than a slightly higher initial price. Pure electric cars, for instance, offer many, many, many more inconveniences, and yet Carlos Ghosn says that in a few years they're going to have 10% of the total market share in the world. It just doesn't ring true. We're going to have to work much harder at giving consumers what they want and then figure out how to make it more fuel efficient and more emissions.
Let me hear Lauren and then Tyler.
Yeah, well, there's one last thing that I found that was interesting. You're right on the point of the consumers are going to have to make those decisions. But what's also interesting is the car manufacturers don't make any money on the Prius, on the Ford Escape Hybrid, on any of these electric cars. They're claiming they're actually going to take a loss in many cases. Ford has said that even Carlos Ghosn has said we're taking a loss on these cars. So if the companies are taking a loss, it's not going to help them build better cars because where are they going to get the money from? The government can only subsidize so much. You can only print so much cash.
Why are they taking a loss on these cars if they're so popular?
they're not that popular. If you see, there's only about 3% of the market share. Consumers are not there yet. They're just not there yet. They're just like a smart car. There's some people are buying them here in the US. They're having one heck of a time. They cannot penetrate the marketplace because of what consumers want. So you can force this down their throat, but I still don't believe that if there's not enough of them are being sold, there's no way to make money on it.
Tyler.
I disagree. I don't think it's being forced down anybody's throat. I think that consumers are hinting what they're looking for down the road, and it takes a lot of preparation to get there. Sure, you know, there's going to be expensive cars like the Volt, $40,000. Not a lot of people are going to be able to afford that, yet they can somehow afford their SUV that costs $70,000. You know, I was talking with Bob Lutz of GM, and he said the first couple of years he expects it's going to be movie stars and celebrities and rich people who buy the Volt. But then with subsequent generations of the car, the price will get down to the level, and then the consumer demand will meet up with it.
Bob, I wonder if there's an analogy, and some smokers will forgive me for bringing this up, but I wonder if there is an analogy to smoking, where at one point society and governments basically said, we don't care if you want to smoke. You can't do it in theaters. You can't do it in restaurants. You can't do it in offices. Here's what we're going to permit. Can you do the same thing with cars? I'm sorry, you can't buy polluting cars anymore. You can't buy these big gas guzzlers. Here's what we're going to permit you to buy. Would you even favor that? Even the guy from Greenpeace is hesitating.
Well, I'm from Pollution Probe, actually.
Excuse me, from Pollution Probe.
But I'll tell you what. There are things that you can't correct for that either a very innovative market mechanism, incentive has to be put in. Look, if you're going to build a hybrid, it's going to cost you more to build it. It's bristling with technology content. It is worth more from a technology content and an innovation perspective than just about anything else on the road. So why aren't people buying it? Consumers will take time. They need the right incentives. They need to understand what the value of that investment is in the future. But what does the automaker get for this? There's this concept brewing up in the US, and it's already in place in Europe. It's called the Feasibility. It says if you reduce the fuel consumption of your model by X amount, you will qualify for an incentive. And so, well, where are you going to get the money to fund that incentive? We're going to take it from the person who didn't put that cost premium technology into their vehicle. And what you have is a mechanism that it works entirely within the auto sector.
You like that idea?
I think it's quite brilliant, because the problem with the regulation is you might get it wrong. But if you have that kind of self-funding mechanism, if you just add a price for every liter of fuel that you can save, automakers will do as much as they can and no more.
I think the market man is having conniptions over here.
Well, it's back to the consumer, and they're ready for this kind of thing. I think it's really important to separate what people will say in a market focus research group in a room of their peers, and they want to appear to be green and environmental, and what they'll do when they actually get to a showroom. Sure. And oh my God, a supercharged V8, I'll take that. Yeah, I mean, yeah. it's really important, and if I'm saying the same thing over again, but if the world was really ready for all these green cars, hybrids would be selling a lot more than 3% of the marketplace.
Well, let's talk about a program that has been extremely popular and extremely discussed over the last little while. The President's plan to trade in clunkers for cash. Cash for clunkers is what he calls it. Lauren Fix, what do you think of the plan?
Well, I have spoken out over and over again that I think it was a mistake. What it did is it pent up demand. They let people know it was coming. Consumers said, oh, I was going to buy a car. Now I'm going to wait. And so when they finally opened the doors to say cash for clunkers would happen, everybody rushed to purchase a car. And those people that qualified, it was the same as handing out $100 bills on the corner in Hollywood. Everyone that could afford a car bought a car and got a rebate. It was wonderful for them. But for those people who couldn't afford a car to begin with, couldn't get credit, weren't able to get a lease, which was a 7-year lease, which is absolutely ridiculous, it wasn't a deal for them. You had to purchase the car.
Okay, but tell me, Lauren, what was the harm?
The rest was waste. What was the harm?
What was the harm? It was good for the environment. It was good for the car companies, which the government now owns. So where was the harm?
Not all of them. Ford is smart enough not to have bought into that, but GM and Chrysler have. The bottom line is now if you walk in the dealerships, they're begging. They're like, please come in. We have to offer incentives again. All they did was clean out 08 and 09s off the model floor, and now they've got 2010s coming in, and they don't know how many to build because they pent-up demand is gone. It's absolutely a grave site in many of these dealerships, and that didn't help the economy. They should have made it a broader program. Again, our country tends to do a lot of knee-jerk reactions, quick decisions, not looking at the bigger picture, and a lot of consumers were left out, and for more reasons than one, the bottom line was they didn't really sell $3 million worth of cars. Dealers are not getting their money, and consumers who were going to buy cars bought cars and got a discount. So
Okay.
it was good for them.
Dennis wants
two
to.
quick points. One is an interesting one, is that scrappage of old vehicles in the U.S. actually went down under the cash for clunkers, as more consumers just sat back and waited and said it's just going to get richer, and they missed out. And then the second one is that who drives a clunker? It's the least capable consumer in the economy, typically the poorest. You're telling the poor to go out and jump up to a new vehicle and take on a $25,000 loan or lease. He should be buying a $5,000 vehicle when he gets rid of his clunker.
So this
not
was
a $20,000
another
vehicle.
perversion of the market.
The
which you
way to
didn't like.
deal with the environmentally owned vehicles is to inspect them off the road like they do in so many other countries. But no politician has the ability or the willingness to actually put a tough inspection program in place.
But you want old clunkers off the road, don't you?
Absolutely, but I want them inspected off the road. You got
But not
15 years,
collectible
12,
cars,
15
not
years of,
collectible cars.
but the politicians won't buy that.
Go ahead, Bob.
I wanted to get back from it. What we're talking about here is the purchase and use of vehicles is only one input to the social issue that we face, which is the degradation of the environment, climate change, air pollution, and so forth. There's a role for regulation to tighten up the underutilized, the unrealized potential for efficiency in the purchase of vehicles. But your question about smoking, really, it talks about you can bring the technology, you can bring the horse to water, bring the technology to the consumer, but you need to supply the infrastructure, and there has to be a price signal. You get the technology, the infrastructure, and the price lined up, and then you might have a societal shift away from less clean transportation. We may get a handle on this issue.
Tyler.
I don't disagree. I think a lot of these things can be done in parallel. Of course, we have to make the cars on the road more efficient, right? And cash for clunkers, I'm not a big fan of it, but anything that constantly turns over the fleet and makes it more efficient is a good thing. But on the infrastructure issue, letting the market determine this is not going to build the infrastructure for electric cars. The infrastructure for that is not as tough to get to as, say, hydrogen. But stuff needs to be done. You're dealing with the utility sector and you're dealing with the transportation automotive sector. So you have to do that in a coordinated way. The market will not do that. So you have that vision, you move in that direction.
David.
And as Dennis so well pointed out, we're going to build this huge, huge infrastructure. And it's going to cost billions upon billions, and nobody's going to buy the cars. Nobody's going to buy the pure electric cars.
How do you know that?
Not nobody, but will enough buy it.
If we define electric cars as pure electric cars, there will be very, very, very few sales. If we start expanding it into extended range electric vehicles, there'll be far more in the distant future. But they don't need the infrastructure.
Well, you know, people in Northern Ontario have been plugging in their cars every night for years and years and years. This is not a kind of a behavior that's unknown to so many people.
I just tested a plug-in hybrid from the city of Toronto. And I returned it to the people that were testing it. And you know what they said? You know, the only darn thing I don't like about this car is I have to plug it in every night.
Okay, well, they're not.
And these are people that are already convinced that they want to go green. What about people that don't care about going green? They're not.
She's telling me we got less than 5 minutes to go, and if that's the case, let's put one more issue on the table here. I want, because all of you follow the automotive industry a lot more carefully than most of our viewers, I suspect, I want you to tell us whether you think the automobile makers are really being green, or do they just want to be seen to be green these days because they know that's what's in? Lauren, tell me.
Well, here in the U.S., I think we're being forced into a corner because of the new CAFE standards that if you're not making your cars get better fuel economy, they're going to force you into a corner to doing that by not letting you sell so many vehicles. Now, one of the things that is interesting, though, that we have the whole picture is if everyone were to switch to a green car, that means less tax revenues, and cars that get 100 miles to the gallon or 256 or 230 or whatever you want to say, or even 50 miles to the gallon. And you'll note that in this country, the results have been, and car manufacturers are well aware of that, is less tax revenues, which means the government's going to have to come in somewhere else to get this money. And so you're watching consumers and car manufacturers working together to try and come up with cars that maybe are greener, but maybe still meet our needs. And so I think car manufacturers like Ford and Nissan and even General Motors, well, now that they're owned by the U.S. government, are all trying to do what's right, but they don't want to give up on those fossil fuel vehicles because consumers still want that. So you're seeing a mixture. It's kind of a PR move, but it's kind of something they're going to have to make change.
Lauren, for the record, the Canadian government, the Ontario government also own a chunk of GM. We don't want to forget them in the mix as well.
That's true, you do.
Are they serious about this, or is this more for marketing?
I think they're very serious. You go back to the 60s where we had noxious emission issues. They invested billions and they eliminated them. Now they've recognized that they have no choice. It may be regulatory driven, market driven. They have no choice, and they're investing billions and tens of billions of dollars on this. Most of that money is probably being misspent, but enough of it's being spent in the right area that they're going to solve this issue at some point. 10, 20 years to solve it, but it's going to get solved.
Tyler.
Yeah, well, they missed the boat on the earlier CAFE standards, and then the foreign automakers jumped ahead of them. So I think that in this case, they are serious about it. They don't want to, we're looking at this in a North American context, but really this is a global thing, a competition for jobs, a competition against foreign manufacturers who North American manufacturers want to leapfrog ahead. So I think they're dead serious.
What do you see, Bob?
Any automaker who's committed to winning market share by competing on value will do well in the shift to green automotive. Anyone who prefers to do the greenwashing in order to try to, or hoodwink the consumers is eventually going to be found out. I think the automakers that have invested in their technology and their innovation are prepared for this. And I think the automakers, the auto parts manufacturers who are supplying them with the innovations and the technologies are going to do very well in this shift to a fuel-efficient future.
And are you concerned the government is forcing them to do something that consumers at the moment have not shown enough appetite for?
No, consumers, I think, are going to benefit from the regulations. The regulations are designed to say, I know why you undervalue an investment in fuel efficiency. I'm going to put a regulation in that corrects for that discount. You're not going to be required to pay additional money for additional technology or anything like that, but you're going to get value out of the money that is required to make the invest. Let's put it this way. When you buy a vehicle under the regulations, there may be a cost premium because there's more technology in that vehicle that makes it greener. But you're going to make that back over the length of time that you own that car, and whoever owns that car afterwards is going to get the benefit of that, and society will benefit overall.
David,
and that's the point of the
Are they
reg.
being green or greenwashing?
I believe they're being extremely sincere. In fact, in some cases, I think they're being too sincere. I will say it again. I think that all the manufacturers that are focusing on pure electric vehicles, I think they're very sincere about doing the job of cleaning up emissions, but I don't think there's going to be a market for them, and I think it'll be to their detriment. And I think it's, as Dennis mentioned once, that it's a detriment to other alternatives to the fossil fuel engine, and that sincerity may get them in trouble in the long run.
Lauren, take the last 30 seconds and tell us if you genuinely believe there's a green revolution happening among the major automakers on this continent today.
I believe there is. I think they want to do what's right for consumers and for the environment. That's something that the government is asking them to do anyhow, but I think they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Whether consumers are ready to make that transition to the level that they should have or would want to, I don't know. A lot of people don't want to give up their vehicles. They don't want to give up their freedoms. They don't want to give up the things that they're used to. And change is something that takes time. So I think that it's going to take a long 10 years from now. We may be looking back and laughing, going, everybody's driving a green car.
Is it change you can believe in, though? That's the next question. That's another show. Lauren Fix, the car coach, as she calls herself, the automotive consultant on the line from Buffalo, New York. Thanks so much for being there for us, Lauren. And
Thank you for having
back here in our Toronto studios, there's the left-hand side of the table, Bob Oliver from Pollution Probe, and Dennis DesRosiers on the other side of the table. David Booth from the National Post on the right, and on the left, Tyler Hamilton from the Toronto Star. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
For more information about tonight's guests and a selection of green car reviews, please visit us online at tvo.org/theagenda. Tonight's debate was produced by Stacey Dunseith. And may we just take this moment to say, welcome back, Stacey. She is back from maternity leave, and that is her first debate that she's produced in a year and a half. Happy to have you back, Stacey. Thanks very much. Stacey also has a look at some of our previous green programs. That's on our Inside Agenda producers blog. You'll find that online on our website at tvo.org/theagenda.